Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Richard here, the creator of the Top Hat Gaming Man, dressed all nice and dapper today to celebrate the fact that I finally hit 70,000 subscribers. Now, that is a lovely milestone, ladies and gentlemen. So, I would like to thank all of you so much for continuing to watch this channel, particularly in these rather strange times we are living through. It's probably been some of the weirdest few months of all of our lives recently. Absolutely bizarre. So I thought, to help celebrate today, why not spend some time telling you a little bit more about myself. And the way in which I've decided to go about that is through a Q&A in which I've carried out over on Patreon. I've not done a Q&A, I believe, since July of last year, so it's been quite a while since we last did that. I believe back then I only had about 37,000 subscribers, so half of you are actually new to this channel since even that time frame. So let's try and answer some of these questions. By the way, I've decided to try and film this slightly differently to what I'm used to. I'm actually using a camera phone attached to an Osmo. So we've got a robotic camera person for a change. So let me try moving to see if the camera follows me. Absolutely not. Okay, let's get on to these questions. Right, we have got a question from load. Question from Bubba Kitty. Bubba Kitty asks, what fighting game character do you feel embodies you? Now, I find this question really easy to answer, and it's probably looking at you right in the face. And that would certainly be Dudley of Street Fighter 3 fame. Obviously, there's we're both from the same country, and there's also a resemblance there, particularly throughout the heat or height, I should say, of my pro wrestling career, where we pretty much both had Peaky Blinder-esque looks going on. And I'd just like to point out that I was doing that years and years before the likes of Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate, etc., who have been doing it in recent times. I was first donning that style look all the way back in 2007, and I've not seen Dudley either, because as I said, no one's had really played Street Fighter 3 back then either. So it was just kind of, I wanted to look old school, like an old school British fisticuffs wielding fighter, if that makes sense. Which obviously why these other boys did a similar thing as well, I guess. Tyler Bate, actually, strangely enough, he comes from the British town of Dudley, so there's some links there as well. So Dudley from Street Fighter and Tyler Bate from Dudley. Strange. Next question is from David Highfield. He says, I apologise if you've already answered this, but where did you get your top hat from? eBay. Can't really elaborate any more than that. That's as much depth as I can go into with that question. It came off eBay. Mike Bruno says, he's got a wrestling related question. As a professional wrestler, who would you say has been your biggest influence on your career? I would say right at the beginning, a lot of influence, who strongly influenced me the most in terms of character development, would probably have been JBL, John Bradshaw Layfield. I just loved the pure villain heat he was getting in 2004. And I started wrestling in early 2007. So it wasn't long after he had that hot run as a heel champion, pretty much out of nowhere. And for me, with his big cowboy hat and silly skits, he always kind of reminded me of George W. Bush, who was obviously the president of the United States at the time. So he always came across a little bit politician-y to me. So I thought, well, I'd like to be a politician for my gimmick. So essentially, I based my early wrestling gimmick on what I was seeing Tony Blair doing. So I felt that JBL kind of reminded me of President Bush, who was a heel in my mind, and I wanted to be like Tony Blair, who was also a heel in my mind at the time. So the next question we've got is from Metal Over, and he says, I'll do an easy one. What's the rarest game in your collection, and how and when did you get it? Can I see it now? Just like this. It's here somewhere, but I'm struggling. Here it is. Spotted. Mega Man X3 complete in-box PAL copy is my rarest game. I paid a ridiculous sum of money for it, quite frankly. The most I've ever spent on a game. But I did want it for 20 years before I finally paid out for it. It was a game I always wanted to add to my collection, but unfortunately it became very expensive over the years. Due to a combination of, firstly, the fact that Mega Man was never that much of a popular franchise in Europe, so the distribution was always low on those titles to begin with. And Mega Man X3 was one of the last PAL Super Nintendo games, so that made it even harder to get hold of in later years. In fact, I paid so much for it, it pretty much fulfilled me as someone who liked to buy games. Ever since then, I've never felt the need to buy an expensive game ever again, because that gave me enough of a rush and enough satisfaction that I've basically felt whole ever since I've owned it. So definitely that game, and I don't regret buying it at all, because it was basically my white wow, which I added to my collection. The next question is from Ron Studd, and he says, how has the transition from a primary ad-supported channel to a Patreon-supported one been going? Very interesting question, Ron. It's very different, I must say, although a lot of the same stresses are there, but at the same time I do feel in a better position in terms of financial woe. Like, I do not feel that I'm in the same position where I have to constantly chase ads all the time, coming up with a title for a video that will necessarily get the most clicks. I can certainly make videos which are a little bit more passion-led and take a few more risks in many regards. But what I will also say is, with having a primarily Patreon-backed channel, there's still a level of trying my best not to be complacent at all, because obviously I want to try my best to keep those patrons sticking around. So that's the thing, really. That's the main difference. Like, before, I'm chasing ads. Now, in some ways, I feel more accountable than I used to be, because suddenly there's over 500 people who pay for this channel to exist. So I find it now more important than ever before to make sure I get videos out within reasonable time frames in order to essentially deliver you a product, if that makes any sense. So swings and roundabouts, but overall I'm absolutely loving the fact that there's 500 people supporting this channel on Patreon. Who would not love that? It's literally the biggest compliment in the world, and it's really helping me out day to day producing these videos. So thank you, Ron, and everyone else who I'm answering these questions from. Question from Sam Torres. He says, what fighting game totally disgusts you? Now, you've probably heard me, well, some of you have anyway, mention this in videos in the past. And if any fighting game was to disgust me, it would certainly be the Mortal Kombat series. I've always felt it's always been a little bit cheap in the marketing, like with the fatalities and essentially trying to be as edgy and controversial as possible. I always felt it in the early days, it relied certainly more on gimmicks than it did on gameplay, and more importantly than that, I didn't like how it influenced the fighting game genre at the time either. Like, there was so many poor copycat impersonations of the game that were released, which were even worse than Mortal Kombat. So, and the fact as well, it's just so different to other fighting games, and not necessarily for good reasons either. Like, a lot of the big games are from very Japanese companies like SNK, and then we've got Capcom, whereas I believe Mortal Kombat is from Midway, which is an American company, which is, to me, the primary reason why the marketing of that game is so different to most of the other fighting games, considering they came out of Japan. And even Killer Instinct, if we bring that into the equation as well, that's a decent game which is very different to anything that came out of Japan, and that's a British game which was inspired by Mortal Kombat in some ways, and that's very different too. So definitely Mortal Kombat, because I feel like it inspired more bad games than good games. We've got Killer Instinct, and then most of the rest, no thank you. Next question from Matthew Rindle. He says, if you could choose to be a fighting or beat 'em up game character, who would it be and why? I'm going to say, Matthew, that I'm going to say Dudley. Definitely Dudley, because I feel the transition from being me to being him wouldn't be that difficult. I don't think my life would change a great deal. It'd be a fairly easy transition. What do you think at home? Next question is from CSL316. What sort of software do you use to put your videos together, editing, recording audio, game capture, etc.? And how do you learn to do all that? Well, there's quite a lot to break down there, so let's try and get through it. Editing software, I use Premiere Pro, Adobe Premiere Pro. I use for recording audio, I tend to use Audacity quite a lot and then import it or export it into Premiere Pro. In terms of game capture, when I do it, I tend to use something called an Elgato capture card, which is also linked to Elgato software. And in terms on how I learned to do it all, it was pretty much skills that have been accumulated over a lifetime. My childhood was very similar to that of James Rolfe. If you watch Cinemassacre's channel, I spent a great deal of my childhood playing with my parents' camera. By the time I was in my early teens, I had my own camera, and me and my friends would make a lot of home movies together. Back then, my father taught me how to edit using a simple home mixer board, and I used to edit from VHS tape to VHS tape by linking two VCRs together, and sometimes even linking a stereo system into the back of them as well, so you could put music over the top. Very complicated process back then compared to now, but I do think that learning to edit under such what would you call it, restraints and limitations has really helped make things a lot easier these days, because I was editing before all these like 18, 19-year-olds were having YouTube channels and just making content with ease. The struggle was real back in my day. Like, I am genuinely retro. And but yeah, when I got to about 18, I did a national diploma in video production when I was at college as well. I spent a little bit of time working as a production runner in the British film industry. So I've got lots of little bits here and there where I learned how to do it all. Also, when I was at university, because I ultimately chose not to study video production, I decided to study management instead. Over the course of every summer, I would fly over to Greece, and I made a little business deal with a company called 1830, and I would go on all of their booze cruises, excursions. I would film their tourists, and basically I would sell tourists holiday DVDs back to them. So I've got a lot of experience over the years coming in from all different angles, which ultimately built to what I'm doing now. So yeah, that's that one answered, I think. Next question's from Joshua Lafleur. Nice name there. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Dodgeball. He says, are there any RPGs you're a fan of? I know the channel tends to be fighting centric. I absolutely adore RPGs, Joshua. And if you go through the channel's back catalogue, some of my very first videos were covering RPGs. I think my first upload ever was on Earthbound, actually, and there's one up on Secret of Mana, and there's one on Pan's Dragoon Saga there somewhere as well, I believe. And so yes, I've played literally probably hundreds of JRPGs, and I've pretty much played through and finished most of the mainstream ones that have been released in the last couple of decades. So absolutely adore the genre. I'd like to make more videos on them. Obviously, if you're making a video on an RPG, it's a lot more time consuming than a lot of other content I make. So it would be quite difficult unless I zoomed in on specific niches, like maybe the laws of characters or something like that. But then we are deviating way off from what I'm doing at present. But I absolutely adore the genre. But it's really hard to pinpoint just one RPG I love over the others. Or is there actually? No, come to think of it, there definitely is. There is one I certainly do love more. There's this little RPG that changed everything, known as Raid Shadow Legends. And I can certainly say that that game has given me more than any other. Next question is from Andrew Goad, and he says, Desert Island games. You are sent away to a desert island and can take only 3 games with you. What are they? You have the means to play the games, for example, the game platform, and access the power and Wi-Fi for those online games. I suppose, Andrew, with regards to that question, I just want a sip of tea quickly. I would say you want games that last. If you're stuck on a desert island, you've got a lot of time to pump in. So JRPGs really perfect under those sort of circumstances. I'm going to say Pokemon Sun or Moon as my first pick. I do like the Pokemon games. There is they've got a lot of durability to them. There's so many different things you can do in a Pokemon game. You can collect, you can battle, you can collect, you can battle, you can collect, you can battle. Overall, there's a lot to do. So I would really enjoy playing through Sun and Moon again and try to catch all of them, because I feel that's probably the most refined Pokemon game they've made so far. The newest one, what they released on the Switch, it was a bit rushed, bit rough around the edges, not too good. But Sun and Moon at the moment is the peak of the Pokemon franchise. Next, I'm going to say this one will probably come out of the blue. You won't expect this one whatsoever from me. First person shooter. Hey, never heard me talk about that before. I would pick Borderlands 2. Again, a big game with a lot you can do. There's a lot to do in that game. A huge world to explore, achievements to potentially unlock. You can level up. You can play it online. There's all sorts you can do with Borderlands games. I feel like I could get a lot out of that. And let's think. This is quite a tough question, because if you've only can pick 3, modern games are probably a better option, because they are made for you to sit in front of a screen for long periods of time, whereas older games you're encouraged to master essentially maybe like a 3-4 hour segment. So modern games are probably best for being stuck on a desert island these days. Let's have a fighting game. Well, arguably a fighting game, but we might get into discussing this a little bit later. Let's say Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Again, there's just so much to do, so many unlockables. To do everything within that game would take an outrageous amount of time. So I've chosen 3 quite different games which would basically fill up a lot of playtime. Hope I answered that one okay for you. Got a question from Brian Barry. He says, if you could live as one evil boss in a game, which one would you choose to be and why? Who would be the best evil boss to be within a game? Pondering. I've got it. But again, it is debatable whether or not he is evil, because evil is just a point of view, isn't it? I'm going to say Wario from Mario Land 2. Like, who would not want to be Wario? He's got lots of money. He's got a castle. And he's got lots of money and he's got a castle. So Wario, who would not want to be such a distinguished gentleman? Fantastic moustache, great muscles, handsome young stallion. I would definitely choose to be Wario. And he's in Smash Brothers, so an easy cop-out answer there. Yes. We have next got a question from Live Hedgehog. I saw one of those today, actually. They say, what games do you think were unfairly judged upon release or have an unfair reputation? I've always thought that Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts had an amazing vehicle creation system, but it's been shunned because it wasn't the platformer the fans wanted. Never actually got around to playing that one, Live Hedgehog, despite actually owning a copy. So maybe I'll give that a try down the line. In terms of a game what I feel is underrated and gets belittled far too much in comparison to the overall quality of the game, Hotel Mario for the Philips CDI. It gets ripped to absolute shreds, and really it's just a simple puzzle game with not a lot overall wrong with it. I think people just give it a hard time because it's got those strange animated Russian cutscenes, but the actual gameplay itself is absolutely fine. Like, people do not give the same abuse to Donkey Kong 93 on the Game Boy, do they? And they're both exactly the same style games. So why does Hotel Mario get the crap ripped out of it, but Donkey Kong 93 doesn't? I'd rather personally play Hotel Mario than Donkey Kong 93. It's decent, and yeah, I like the game. So I think it's ridiculous that people belittle it all the time. Personally, I don't even think most people probably own a CDI to have even got round to giving it a go. So I think they're just people who've gotten too heavily involved with meme culture and let it get out of hand, which is not a surprise to be sure, and certainly not a welcome one. Question from Oscar Martinez. I need another sip of tea because I'm starting to lose my voice. He says, isn't it time you officially ditch the Top Hat Gaming Man and fully become Big Daddy Top Hat? How do you Brits feel when games have an American cast of voice actors like Resident Evil, Final Fantasy VII Remake, or, well, most games? Were you a fan of the British cast in Xenoblade Chronicles? That's a fair amount to break down there, Oscar. That's being a bit greedy, I'd say. There's a lot of questions, but no, it's fine. I noticed as I've been doing this video, I feel like 1 minute I myself was Richard, but because I've been talking to the camera for quite a while, I feel like it's just very natural for me to get a bit pantomime-y, a bit pro wrestling, a bit animated, and I'm probably channeling Top Hat Gaming Man sometimes, trying to be myself, but yeah, it's very hard for me not to play up in front of a camera. I'll try taking this off and do my hair a little bit and give you some more sensible answers, but it may be tough, so hold tight. In regards to become Big Daddy Top Hat full time, they're just still names, aren't they? Big Daddy Top Hat Gaming Man, aka, also known as, although that's not aka. I can't remember what aka stands for, but it's certainly not. Yes, it is also known as. I'm being a complete idiot now. He says, how do you Brits feel when games have an American cast of voice actors? I think it's absolutely fine, but what I do feel is important, and this isn't just in games, this is in all entertainment, that they have a little bit of... What's the word? Can't think of the word. This is really annoying me, but basically that it lines up. Like, for example, the new series of Thomas and Friends, or Thomas the Tank Engine, whatever you call it in your region, the American dub's absolutely ridiculous because for some reason all of the British trains in the show have British accents, but for some reason Thomas just completely randomly, despite being from the same location, has an American accent. Stuff like that really grinds my gears because I don't understand the logic behind that, other than let's make the main character American to make him relate more to an American audience. In fact, you might notice a lot of anything fairy tale based tends to have British accents. Anything more futuristic tends to have American accents, which I suppose is a good representation of the new world and the old world in a way. So that's all I've got to say about that. I do really like the voices in Xenoblade. The same goes actually for the last story as well. They've all got... And Ni no Kuni, there's quite a few up there. Although again, once... I think in Ni no Kuni even... does the main character have an American accent for no reason, yet the rest of the cast have British accents? Don't think so. Not in the first one, but I think in Ni no Kuni 2, the main character has an American accent, but at least it makes sense because I think he comes from New York or something along those lines. But yeah, consistency. That was the word I was looking for earlier. I feel that voice acting needs consistency. Yeah, even like Lord of the Rings has Frodo randomly got an American accent in that? No. It's Star Wars, isn't it? Most of the characters have got English accents in Star Wars, but then the main are American. Like, doesn't Obi-Wan have an English accent? I believe. And then, yeah, so that's weird when you've got a mishmash of both. I like consistency, one or the other. Sorry, that one was a bit rambly, I think. Question from Charlie Lebrat. They say, what was the first game you ever played? Mine was Pitfall for the Atari 2600. That's really hard for me to answer, Charlie, on the basis that whilst some people did not play games till they was already a man, I was born into them, moulded by them. So I was playing them when I was so young that I can't actually remember what I started with. My parents would take me down to the arcades on trips to Greece, and I would button bash them. We had an Amstrad CPC in my house as well, so I'd play games on that. Some of the earliest games was on that system, and they were games like Arkanoid, Who Dares Wins 2. They're two examples that really stick out in my head. In the arcades, one of the earliest games I can remember was Wonder Boy, but it would be really hard to pinpoint what exactly was the first one because I was playing them before I can actually remember memories, if that makes sense. Question from PMJ 1985. What was your favourite movie based on video games? Not quite sure whether this answer is going to be a cop-out or not, but I'm certainly going to say, is it called The King of Kong documentary? Starring, what's his name? Steve Weeb, which is a fantastic name, or Weeby, however it's pronounced. And one of my all-time favourites, Billy Mitchell. I just felt he was such a ridiculous cartoon villain. He reminds me of something that's come straight out of a Ben Stiller movie. In fact, I'm surprised there isn't like a Ben Stiller or Will Ferrell style movie starring a character like that. It's just ridiculous, like with his lovely, beautiful hair and his USA tie, where he basically tries to justify a lot of his villainy as patriotism and refers to himself as Mr. USA. And all that. I think is absolutely hilarious, frankly. Apart from recently, when he's been suing YouTubers. That's going a bit too far. Naughty, naughty Mr. Mitchell. Apart from that, though, I liked your previous work. Don't sue me. Question from... which one am I up to? Ozzy Astaroth. He says, what's your favourite non-fighting, non-brawling game? Ooh, there's so many games, as you can see. There's a lot of games I like. So I'm going to just answer you with the game I've been playing the most this year. I've ranked up over 60 hours on it thus far, and I'm highly confident that I'm going to rank up another 40 on it, bring us around to 100 hours, and that is Fire Emblem Three Houses. I've already played through it twice. I'm on my third playthrough, and I have full intentions of having 4 playthroughs. The game is just that addictive, and to me it's the greatest Fire Emblem that's been made yet. Certainly a Nintendo property that goes from strength to strength with each release. And I find it absolutely crazy that a game that seems quite limited in what you'd think they could do with it, pretty much a strategy RPG, the fact that they keep innovating and reinventing the game and making it better and better, I just find really impressive. Absolutely love that game, and I'm going to play it in bed as soon as I finish recording tonight. Next question is from Joris. What's your favourite experience memory from your wrestling days? It's got to be appearing on TNA Impact's British Boot Camp Season 2 series. Pretty much they ran a WWE Tough Enough style show, but for already trained professional wrestlers who was working the indie circuit. 1 second, I have an sip of tea to continue this story. What I did not know, though, going into the show, that a lot of it, what I'm going to have to tell you, this might surprise you, but wrestling is fake. So I turn up to this show to go for a legitimate audition in my eyes. I've turned up to this legitimate audition where I've gone in front of judges, Al Snow, Gail Kim, Samoa Joe, and I pretty much do my spiel like what I'm doing now. And they're all taking it very seriously the whole time. Al Snow is pretty much taking the Simon Cowell style role where he's being ultra critical of everyone who's going up there. But thankfully with my performance, I actually managed to break Al Snow, which I was really proud of. Like, he could not keep a straight face looking at this face and looking at my arse. So I managed to make Al Snow laugh. I managed to make Samoa Joe laugh. Look at Samoa Joe. Does he look like a man who laughs very often? He doesn't, does he? But I made them all laugh. So they put me on the show. And what I found out when I was put on the show, Jeremy Borash got me to sign a contract to take part. And as I was filling out the contract with them, they let me actually know that the auditions we took part of, because I was one of about 50 or 60 wrestlers who went to these auditions. The auditions were actually fake. Everyone who went for the auditions was meant to fail. They'd already predetermined everyone who was due to appear on the show. They had 16 wrestlers, which they'd already picked around, going around certain really internety wrestling promotions in the UK, like Progress, ICW, all the usual ones you might know of. So they'd been around a lot of those. They'd already signed up 16 talent. Lucky for me, one of those wrestlers got badly injured. Well, that sounds awful. Okay, one of those wrestlers got injured, not badly injured. One of those wrestlers got injured prior to the show, so they considered getting one extra person for the show. So out of the 50 people who turned up to these auditions, I was the one they chose to put on the main show. So that's my greatest wrestling memory, because I basically made an opportunity out of an opportunity that shouldn't have really have even been there. And I made some good connections, met some great people who've given me a lot of confidence ever since. And without that experience, I might not even be here talking to you today, where I've really embraced my persona and everything I do. Like, prior to that, I pretty much treated professional wrestling as no more than a hobby. And I didn't think I'd ever make it to a platform like Impact Wrestling. At the same time, I believe there was people working for the company like Hulk Hogan, Kurt Angle, Sting, etc. If they wasn't working for the company, they would have only recently have just left the company. So that was a really big deal for me at the time, and it just made me realise that I'd always underestimated what I could do. Because when I started wrestling back in 2007, because obviously this TNA thing was 2014, I was looked at as an impossible mountain to climb because I was only 5'9", 5'10", and any British wrestler that had made it in America, the majority of them were all jacked up on steroids. Completely different scene these days. British wrestling and wrestling in general has changed a lot over the years. So I'm now from then on always tried to be a little bit more forward thinking with what I do and a little bit more confident. And the sky's the limit. It's not just for me, for everyone. I hope I didn't ramble too much. That was my inspirational message of the evening. The next one is, we've nearly got through these, ladies and gentlemen. Graham Lacey, did you microcomputer or were you primarily a console bloke? The early days, as I mentioned earlier in this video, started on an Amstrad CPC 464, which was my primary gaming device till I was about 7 years old. But then I went to a friend's house one day and my mind was absolutely blown by Sonic the Hedgehog on the Sega Mega Drive. After that, I went home, told my mum and dad I wanted one. My uncle, who was a lot more tech savvy than them, told them Mega Drive's a little bit out of date now, you want to get a Super Nintendo instead. So I borrowed his, was really impressed with that, and I did go for a Super Nintendo. So the Super Nintendo was the platform that really got me hooked on gaming, but my genesis certainly started on the Amstrad. And an Amstrad still remained in my bedroom till I was 16 years old, which I would game on every now and again anyway, just to have a little bit of diversity from what I was used to doing. So it started on microcomputers, but my passion was really driven by consoles a few years later, just because of my age, essentially. We have a question from Chad Bonning. He says, what's one cancelled title that was confirmed to be in development? Would you have... So I'm going to read that again. I might be rushing. What's one cancelled title that was confirmed to be in development would you like to have seen finished and released? I'm going to say, because I mentioned earlier, I do like JRPGs. I like the Earthbound / Mother series. I would really like it if they could have finished Mother 64 or Mother 3 for the Nintendo 64. That console has got a severe shortage of games in that genre anyway, so it really could have done with one truly great one on the system. So Mother 64, unquestionably, that's what I would like to have seen. PlayStation's Better says, what's your take on Smash Brothers? Is it a fighting game? Personally, I don't consider it one. There's a strong case, in my opinion, PlayStation's Better regarding that one for both sides of the argument. It certainly does not fit into the box of many of the conventions that fighting games had at the time. Obviously, it's not just 2 players on the screen. You could have 4 players even in the first iteration fighting it out at once. You don't have life bars. You can't KO a character by finishing their life bar. Instead, you have to knock them out the ring. In fact, it's got more in common with the likes of Power Stone and Airgites, which both came out around a similar time frame as well. I believe they soon got dubbed arena fighting games. So it's a fighting game, but it's in a subgenre of fighting game, an arena fighter. So it's certainly not a pure fighting game by any stretch, but it is a member of the arena fighting game genre. So it's a fighting game, but a different kind of fighting game. Yes. Man Shovel, my final question. He says, do you have time to watch other YouTubers? If so, what's your favourite YouTube channels? Interesting question, Man Shovel. Obviously, I work full time on here, making gaming videos for all of you. So that's my focus all the time. It's gaming whilst I'm at work. So I don't find myself watching that many gaming videos for entertainment anymore, just because I live and breathe them at this stage. So a lot of the channels I tend to watch are other mediums. I really like Vsauce's content, find it really educational, good stuff. I like a YouTuber called Justin Wang. I think his videos are absolutely hilariously creative, off the wall stuff. And I really like a channel as well, you might have heard of these, they're really mainstream channels, called Gamer from Mars. He makes quite what would seem almost quite bland subjects with quite dry delivery, really entertaining. So I like what he does. I don't know why I like what he does, but it's great content. Game from Mars. I think it's because all of it's quite factually driven. It's good entertaining stuff. So Gamer from Mars, Justin Wang, Vsauce, those are my picks. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed listening to me talk for this long, answering questions. I'd like to thank everyone who has supported this channel over the years and helped me get to 70,000 subscribers so far. Life has certainly been a battle for all of us recently, but my life has certainly been slightly easier thanks to all of you. So thanks for all of you for watching this. Thank you to all the people who back me on Patreon and those who provided questions for this special Q&A video. And if you too, even if you're not a patron, would like to ask me some questions, post them in the comment section down below, and I will make sure that I single-handedly respond to each and every one of them. Well, each and every one of them that is sensible. If I see anything ridiculous, I will obviously report you. Yes, because I'm a stern man. But yeah, apart from that, sensible questions, I will answer them. I promise. All of them. Okay? So, once again, thank you so much for helping me get to this point. It's been fun. I'm living the dream, doing a dream job. Everything is awesome. So, cheerio.
Born in London in 86, a stacho gent named Richard Parliament. He loves to wrestle, but he loves one more thing, handhelds round the world. He fights in his comments and he argues with fans. It's a problem no one understands. There's two things he loves, it's getting at, handhelds round the world. Drinking fine wine, fighting fanboys, handhelds round the world.
Top Hat Gaming Man.